Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join me today on the webcast. And thank you, Hayes, for the introduction. We're here to take a look at what the heck we have to worry about. How can we figure out that unknown kind of stuff out there? How can I even measure the unknown? Lots of things we're going to end up talking about today. So let's actually just get over into that, let you see what it is we're going to talk about. First, I'll give you a little bit of background about who I am, what it is that I do, etc. And then we're just going to dive straight into it. We've got what we are. Undetected threats? What the heck am I meaning by this? Is this like it's undetected? How do I even know it's there? And then how do we measure it? Because that's really the paradox. If it's undetected, what do we have to worry about this? And we're going to talk about some of the detection coverage metrics we can take a look at, threat detection metrics, machine learning success metrics, and all of that fun things and how they all come back to help us from a vulnerability management perspective. We're going to talk about threat modeling and breach attack simulation, so BAS in there as well. And as I said, bringing this back, I'll try and pull this all together at the end for what we can do from a VM perspective. You'll see that sprinkled throughout the entire presentation as well, but I'll wrap that up at the end for how do we help us from a VM perspective and really why all of this actually matters for us. And then some key takeaways for you, wrapping things up, and I'll leave time at the end for us to have questions as well. Hopefully, knowing myself, I am quite able to talk for as long as I want to. So anyways, let's just get into it. That's the rough roadmap for what we're going to end up talking about here today. So who am I? Who is this person up here? Been an instructor with SANS for a very long time, since about 2010. I have taught the forensics classes, 508 when it was the only one we had, 408 when we first launched it. I've taught, so dealing with the forensics aspects. I've taught with the incident response with Security 504, taught the pen testing classes, Sec 580 and Sec 560. So that's the Metasploit Kung Flu, as well as the penetration testing class that we have, one of them. I've taught the 566, which it was at the time the 20 critical controls, but they've so nicely now gone 18 is the new 20. So the critical controls with 566, as well as my own class that I'm actually the course author on, which is the Leadership 516, which is building and leading vulnerability management programs. I have been through SANS EDU as well, actually graduated with my MSISM degree from them. So lots of engagement, involvement from the SANS family perspective. I do work for the federal government and specifically dealing in the vulnerability management space. My official title is Technical Director of Cyber Posture Management Programs. Regardless, live, breathe, eating, looking at, trying to help the various departments and agencies do a better job relating to vulnerability management. But I've also done lots of other fun things in my career as well. I've done vulnerability management research work when I was in a research agency, done the security operations prime role. So yeah, losing all those evenings and weekends, been there, done that. Lost the t-shirts a few times from that. Deal with system and computer architecture, cloud architecture stuff, service implementation, all kinds of stuff. And I've been doing that for quite a long time, actually, as say on there. But yeah, the gray hair is starting to give it away now. And my kids are quite nice at reminding me that I'm getting old and of the gray hair. So anyways, doesn't matter about me. That's not what you're here to hear about. We're here to talk about these unknown threats. So what's going on here? Well, a little bit of a background on this. With vulnerability management, it has been evolving. It's been evolving for a while. It's not like this is something that just came up in February this year. Ooh, let's think of a change. We've been doing a lot of evolution in VM for the past numerous years. The problem is a lot of people's programs or what companies are doing for vulnerability management hasn't necessarily kept evolving as well. Because this really isn't about just fixing the CVEs out there. What do we have for patches and how do we fix them? We need to have evolved beyond that. Because vulnerability management, quite frankly, is more than just the CVEs. What do we have out there for configuration problems? As an example, what are we looking at from the exposures and how are we mitigating this? The whole asset inventory problem that we, not necessarily us to own, but it's key for us because you end up with all those random things that suddenly appear and have problems that, ooh, we didn't even know about. The shadow assets and shadow IT. Because really, what we're doing is we're shifting to more of a risk reduction function. And that is where we are moving from a VM program and design and what we need to focus on risk reduction and exposure management. Because it's not just, as I said, dealing with patches anymore. There's a lot more. Our environments are exceedingly complex. And so the problem is, how do I know if I'm even being effective at it? That's those unknown unknowns. And really, how can we start to measure success or even be able to tell if we are being effective at that? Do I have a great, good picture view of things, or do I just have a great sense of confidence here? And there's a whole bunch of those, we'll call it the false negatives, because I'm not actually being told about any kind of problems. That's really what those unknown unknowns are false negatives in our environment or the inability to detect items. So, what we need to look at here is how can I actually maybe try and solve some of these problems or see if I have detection problems or if my exposures are there that I'm not even able to check for. That is what we're going to be focusing on here today. Pardon me. So that's how vulnerability management has been evolving for us. So that is the groundwork in essence for it. And those undetected threats, what really does that mean for us? Is it something that maybe I'm not able to detect? Let's go a simple example from the scanners do not have rules in it yet because it's an unknown or a just released vulnerability that's out there, those 0 days, or ones that aren't even published yet. But it also comes into our visibility or the detection logic that we're using. Am I actually able to find some of the problems, look and see the exposures that are out there inside my organization? So it is both unknown exposures and unknown vulnerabilities that come from a wide variety of sources for us. It can be because we don't have a way or we haven't thought about, am I checking for the various TTPs, the techniques, tactics, and procedures as an example for some of the attack types in the MITRE framework? Do I have a way to be able to detect activity there that would then help me feed in and tie into the VM components from a prioritization? Do I need to ensure this gets patched? Or because we can detect the attacker, maybe I'm happier or I'm able to do the compensating control and take more time instead of wrestling like the sky is falling situation and we need to get this done as an emergency patch. That's what we want to try and do is bring this stuff together. I'm kind of getting the cart before the horse here a little bit, but it is. That's what we're meaning from an undetected threat. Is it a configuration? Is it because I don't have the ability to see stuff? Or because we're moving to the exposure management front, it is, am I actually even able to check for some of these aspects in my environment? And it is really a paradox related to this as well, because how can I measure undetected threats? Um, hmm, I can't detect it. How can I measure it? It's kind of like, let's just pick on the Matrix here. There is no spoon. It's not the spoon that bends, it's you. But it is. How can I tell this? Oh, I can't detect it. How do I? Hmm. That's kind of a little bit of a challenge that we have here, don't you think? Because it really is, as the one Fraser, and it's the absence of evidence does not equal the evidence of absence here. So what it is it doesn't mean because I can't see something doesn't mean that we're safe. I can make my environment so I have 0 incidents that are happening inside of it. Doesn't mean they aren't there. I can just change the telemetry. So it is. We want to make sure that we're able to check and look at these. And how we're doing that really is from proxy and other validation methods. And we can take a look to see how we're starting to be effective inside our environments. So we're going to talk through this here. We're going to take a look at these kind of proxy approach. So what do I mean by this? So I'm going to have to take a look at some numerous things here. Everything from what do I have for indicators that are helping me know is the coverage adequate? Things like, well, we'll talk about them. I'll show you some examples of this coming up, but it is looking at, can I try and tell? Maybe it is coming in with, we'll pick on the red team, or doing breach and attack simulations. Are you able to detect the activities or not? So detection coverage, do I have a method in place that's actually going to help me find the problems? And we want to continue to test our assumptions. So it really is continuous validation that we want to do, have to do as part of our programs to try and keep up. Because it is, summarizing that up, our networks are evolving quick to begin with, but the adversaries are also doing a whole lot of quick adaptations as well, or they're being quite creative, I would argue. So if we aren't evolving our networks and our detection mechanisms and how we're looking at the exposures that we have, how am I going to make sure that I'm actually going to be able to block, or focusing on being able to block the right things through our patches and the compensating controls and managing those exposures, as well as how am I going to be able to actually do this and report to the leadership team. And not like we're going to be able to go back and say, we had 73% reduction in undetected threats. They're going to look at you like, what? We need to be able to put this more into, I'll call it the business speak, and be able to communicate the information. It's not just patch counts for us. How can we actually identify the risk? And as more and we're leveraging so much more from the machine learning AI aspects in our house, how can we actually see if they are being effective for identifying the problems, as well as, let's tie it back to VM some more, can I even tell if there's a vulnerability there? Ooh. So regardless, there's lots of things we have to worry about and continue to evolve our program to truly look at the exposures. And ultimately, are we making good decisions for risk reduction? Because that is our ultimate goal. How do I reduce the risk for the organization? And I can't patch 1,257,000 problems that are being reported for the organization today. How do I make sure I'm actually dealing with what truly matters? That is what we're trying to inform, leveraging pieces of context, looking at the problem with a different set of lenses to help identify what really matters for us. That is what we need to change our vulnerability management programs to be able to do. So let's start off. We're talking about this detection. Now, one of the things we can easily do is we're going to start taking a look from a detection perspective. Now, the first one, everybody's favorite thing to have to worry about, asset coverage. Really? Yes. Do we actually have coverage of the assets we have in the environment? And then you can see here, it's a percent of known versus unknown assets. Okay, what's going on here? Now, what we're trying to do is make sure that we know what is inside our environment and we actually have the ability to look for all of the types of problems and the exposures that can be there. A lot of the problems that we have that get taken advantage of by the attackers, we know about the asset, but I don't have a way to check for the type of problem that is on there. Let's pick on a web service that's related to, let's say, some configuration things that are set up on that server. I don't have a method to actually check that. Or is it because of a cloud identity and access management misconfiguration that is allowing stuff to be exposed? Is it because my API is not properly managed and I've got some exposure that's happening there? maybe, just maybe, it could be something I'm not checking for, like infrastructure as code. Am I actually provisioning this into the environments correctly? All examples of unmonitored or ways that attackers are taking advantage of us. But at the same time, we have tools about that. So that can help us check for any of those kinds of problems. Now, I'm not saying a tool is the ultimate solution here for everything. We do need the people and the processes in place to help us as well. But understanding the assets we have, what is the footprint that we have out there so we can properly manage the attack surface and ensure that we can check for all of those problems. If I can see that I know I have all of these assets, but I know I cannot check all of them for various types of exposures and vulnerabilities, now I know I don't have the coverage I need inside the environment. Log visibility is an example. Another thing we want to take a look at. Can we actually get the telemetry about this to see if something is happening inside the environment? Do we have them being properly ingested and correlated? Now, you're probably thinking vulnerability management, and let's say this little high level summary. I'm not feeding stuff into the SIM for it to do some cross correlation. Why are these related? Remember I said this is also about exposure management. We've evolved beyond it. This is where we start to get the crossover happening between a lot of our security disciplines and information that is needed. If I need to understand what is actively going on inside my environment, I need the visibility because that will help me prioritize a fix that has to go on instead of just waiting for the IR team to actually have to respond. So visibility, do we have the visibility to even see if there's something happening in the environment? Do we have tool coverage as an example? Can we check for the MITRE attack techniques? Ooh, that's an interesting one. Pardon me. Do you have the ability to look for the TTPs? Now, this is not only from the VM classic VM perspective, this is as we're going into the exposures. If I have a vulnerability on a system and I have no way to look for that TTP that would take advantage of it, that's a problem. That should bubble up the importance of fixing that or putting compensating controls in play faster. Because if I've got a problem and no way to see if someone's taking advantage of that, how am I ever going to know it's there? So that's another detection coverage component we do need to be able to take a look at. And that should help inform your program which exposure I do not have the ability to watch for if it's being taken advantage of. That means I need to look at these types of problems faster as, say, new ones come out, or evaluating what's in the backlog inside our environment. Because this really does help us answer, are we able to see what is going on inside the environment? And are we even watching the right things and able to see all of the items inside our environment? So that's what we're going to mention here from the detection side. And why am I not moving? There we go. Threat detection. This is ultimately, if you really want to summarize it, it's a little bit of the CTEM stuff going on in action. If you're not familiar with continuous threat exposure management, side, there's some papers that have been put out. I put one out from the SANS. It would be posted on the SANS website. I've done a couple webcasts as well on CTEM. General overview. It's a term that was coined by Gartner probably 3 years ago now, maybe 3.5. But it's looking at it from an exposure management perspective, some of the stuff I've been talking about. There are other terminology, but that's probably the strongest that you see out there from an industry perspective. But looking from a threat detection perspective. Now, using things like breach and attack simulations. What these are, either from a platform, like let's say it's a BAS platform, it's trying to automate the process, like the controlled tests for us, of known attacker behaviors. So the BAS tools, what they're trying to do is, and they map through to some of the MITRE TTP components, and what's trying to see, am I actually able to detect this? So understanding and measuring, I can see the simulation tool is trying this tactic. My tools are detecting it. Great. Now looking at it from an exposure side, the parts I really don't like to see. What happens when I have BAS that's coming through running tests and it's quiet in the SOC? I don't see anything. So we've missed being able to detect this. So looking at what we see from those informs a program from an exposure perspective. I don't have those coverage. Similar from a purple team, red team perspective. This is not the automated tools, not well, they leverage automated tools and stuff, but it's throwing slightly more complex components in here because really it's more of the human in the loop, be it the red team, purple team. It is trying to actually do more of the emulation, letting you pivot or change your tactics, do more modification than just what's from an automated testing tool. If I changed one flag, one parameter inside there, it might get me through where the automated testers may not be, or the BAS tools may not have that kind of, call it fuzzing capability. But again, helping us inform. So if the red team, purple teams are going through, are we able to detect that? So it's giving us the view again, what the attackers are doing in the environments or against the environments. And can I find this? Because if I'm not detecting it, if I have an exposure, I have no way to know that someone's actually going to be able to take or is taking advantage of that until we find them somewhere else 3 months later, and then we're able to do our root cause and have to shut down the whole network. We want to try and get this faster to manage the exposures. That's where we're migrating to. So this is how BAS and purple teams help out, trying to identify the blind spots that we have in our tooling, in our capability, in the detection methodologies that we're using in order to ensure that we can deal with the exposures we have effectively. If I know the attacker can always get in on this certain kind of attack because I cannot see it, I dang well better be fixing those kind of problems a whole lot faster in the environment. So it is an informed, it's a piece and a very important piece of context to help us deal with the prioritization problem and percolating to the top what really is important for us to deal with. That is how these really help us from a VM perspective. Now, we were talking about machine learning, and we're seeing ML and AI coming all over the place for us, be it on helping parse through the logs, having it take a look at information, generating alerts for us. Like we probably can't have a conversation with a vendor these days without them saying something related to AI 17 times in the half-hour meeting. So how can we tell if this is actually being effective? We want to start taking a look at some things like the true positive rates. So what the AI ML is actually supposed to be doing for it, are they actually being identified correctly? Tie this back to your BAS tooling. So if I have automated detection going on, is it finding it for the coverage and is it categorizing it correctly? I know I was using TTP whatever 347, but it thought it was something different. There is something that actually we need to get better tuning. It informs basically the models that are being used or how it was even trained. Is it being effective or not for us? Is it helping us actually find the problems, or it flags something, but then it puts the analyst on a wild goose chase for a while till they realize, oh, this is actually something different, which may change our response, may change the threat associated with this, or the potential impacts from that exposure. Because if they're trying a technique, a tactic, one of the TTPs, but this vulnerability isn't there, that's what we're alerted on. And after some analysis, it's actually a TTP that is able to take advantage of that exposure. Ooh, that changes how we think and how we respond. False positive rate. What are we actually having out there that, telling us there's the problem when it isn't? So we want to make sure we're trying to minimize these because we don't want to be wasting time. Definitely don't want the SOC wasting their time. They're up to their eyeballs in alligators anyways. So having alerts coming on. helping. And why does this matter to us? Again, it's back to the exposure. That is ultimately where we're going and what we're trying to do and manage inside our environment. So you want to be looking from the exposure perspective and how are we actually triggering on these. Now, precision and recall. This is a little bit more nuanced related to machine learning and performance. Precision reflects the proportion of the machine learning alerts that are correct, while recall reflects the proportion of attack behaviors that are successfully detected. So, am I able to find them out, the positives, as well as am I actually able to successfully detect? So, they're related but different. And you've got to have a balance between, because this really does impact the models that are being used underneath this, the logic and how we're programming them into. So these two come into play. And ultimately, our goal is to try and deal with the mean time to detect. We want to drive this down. And so, looking at it from an ML perspective, and quite frankly, overall in the organization, what are we seeing for mean time to detect? If we have the breach and attack simulation tool running, and it takes 3.5 hours for the alerts to actually get populated up, that's 3.5 hours that if it was an actual bad guy, that we don't even know it's there. You want these to be quick, but it also highlights just how effective is the machine learning ML components actually enabling the program and the overall security for the organization to respond quicker. If we were finding them before we introduced ML in an hour and now it's 3.5, not much value coming from that. Now, is there? We want to drive this for under our simulation environments. We want to show that this is actually fast and quick because that'll help us ensure that when we need to trigger on something that is realistic, we know and understand the systems are working well. And then the dwell time. How long are we actually seeing the attackers and the ability inside the environment? Because we want to reduce this, giving the attackers less time there, less time to try and move around, establish more foothold, pivot, continue to populate across the environment, continuing to put the ransomware everywhere. So now suddenly the whole organization is bricked. We know that we are going to have people that are looking at our environments. We know we are going to get breached. How fast can we find them? How fast can we get them out is what we want to do. And we want to make those as short as possible. The days of we're going to keep everybody out, we know that isn't the case anymore. So these are methods that we can help look to see how some of these detection and tooling that we have is going to be able to help us out to see, are we doing things better? But bear with me, we're going to tie this all back to VM coming up more than I've just been layering out here. Another thing we can deal with here to help look from an organization perspective, understanding the coverage and exposures, threat hunting activities, going through the environment, a great thing to be doing, looking for what do we actually have in here for certain tactics, whatever, and indicators of compromise. So looking to see what's there that we haven't alerted on. Taking a look to see, because of the threat hunting, what have we actually created for new alerts, new detection mechanisms? Because the threat hunters found stuff we never alerted on it, never saw it. That's going to help us understand, are we going to be able to find the bad guys? So now we're showing the threat hunters as they're going through, yes, we have coverage for this. Yes, we have activities. Or I'll throw this slightly and twist it around. Remember before we were talking about, do we have the coverage for the different TTPs? If we don't have a coverage for the TTP, that might be something really good for the threat hunters to actually take a look at. Look to see if you see any indicators of compromise related to this. Because if I know we have detections and we've shown they're working, it's not a waste of time for the threat hunters to go looking for those, but I probably would have seen it. Now, if I know I've got a gap of these four, that may be a better use of time. Can I actually find any indicators of this? Because I know we don't have the coverage. That exposure is there. Tying it back to VM, if I know I have a vulnerability that exists and we don't have the coverage from the TTPs, Can the threat hunters look to actually see if there are indicators of compromise when this has been alert? Helps you narrow it down, get the focus, leverage the contextual information we have, those blind spots where we either need to bring in new tooling technology, new rules, new methods to detect here, or at least where I have to put more focus when a problem is now introduced to the environment. That is actually leverages that capability. So as you can see, we're taking a look at a lot of different components here, but it all helps inform us from a VM perspective. That's what we're trying to do here, is really show how we have to manage our environments these days, and quite frankly, how we're going to need to be working with the other parts of the organization. And with this kind of telemetry, some of the information and the metric components we've just been talking about, this is how we can see if we're actually being effective at the exposure management controls inside the organization. So there you go, stole a little bit of the thunder. But threat modeling, we want to make it into the high risk scenarios. Do we have it? Real world stuff like that, it does a great way to actually try and understand and check if we've got problems from what's been going on. But doing threat hunting, tying that together with where we have exposures that we know we don't have the coverage and they're on a business important asset, kind of puts some really good value for the work that is happening. So can we tie these detections back to high risk threat scenarios? All right, that's what we want to be able to do. So it's helping us understand, are we actually monitoring this? We talked about the mapping back over to the MITRE ATT&CK. You can map it to any of the models if you want out there. Do we have detection rules that are mapped back to those? So then I know I can detect those adversary behaviors. That's where you see the benefits from the breach and attack simulations, the purple team monitoring, the threat hunters out there, and seeing, are we actually checking this out? Can we validate these type of situations? So say as an example, you do have your organization is really concerned about, pick on ransomware, let's just pick on that. What are the different techniques that are going to be coming in? Can you have the breach and attack simulation or the red teaming actually looking and trying to simulate those attacks coming in and the actions that are taken? And are we detecting them? As well as, do I have vulnerabilities that they can take advantage of to be able to enable them to do their attacks? Those are the ones I want to get rid of. If that is my biggest concern, what are the scenarios I put into the mix for them? Then how does that feedback for the telemetry to me? Because that's what we want to be able to do, which ties into the next slide here. It's how do we close this back? I want to get this back to VM. I've been talking about threat hunting and threat intelligence. I got purple team and red team breach and attack simulations. None of those are in my shop from a vulnerability management perspective or in the exposure management. I've got to work with a lot of different teams. Some may be there. They may not. It does depend on your organization. But often these are different groups that I end up having to work with. So how do we get better coordination going here? I have to make sure of that. So tying it back to the VM, that's where we are from a slide perspective. The high-risk attack paths that have been identified, the tactic techniques that are not actually being covered, that is where I have to focus the patching efforts. That could be, even if it is a low priority problem or a low scoring vulnerability, if there are exploits that are available for it, that 7 might actually be the most important thing that we need to deal with. This is why we want to layer in extra pieces of context when we're looking at the prioritization. We've moved well beyond here. This is the CVS score 10, we need to fix it situation. This is looking at it from what is actually actively happening in the environments from a threat intelligence perspective. What do I have for business priority going on for my organization? I've confirmed whether or not I actually have some telemetry available to detect these kind of attacks or not. So layering even those three together really increases the value that we are bringing to the table, because now I can show that we are actually dealing with the situations. It is reporting on it really to well, you'll see this in the next slide, I believe. But can I report on this from an exposure perspective? It's not just patch counts anymore. These are exposures that have been validated, and the risks that were coming up from them or were appeared, we were able to remove from the environment. So this is no longer an exposure for us. It's not just we patched 347 things this week. Yeah, useless metrics, quite frankly. Um, my view, it doesn't tell me anything from a business context, doesn't tell me any kind of good details. I want more information to help me make informed decisions as a leader related to the risk. If I know there is a current exposures that are out there, I don't have the means to actually get them detected if someone's taking advantage of it. I should be, as a business leader, asking questions around that. Definitely from a security perspective, how do I minimize the risk? This might dictate compensating controls get put into play. Maybe this is something actually has to be further isolated. Maybe this pulls it offline because I've got that other ammunition besides, oh, there's a CVS score 8.3 on that box. No business context around it. So it's helping understand for the leadership perspective, what is the risk? How do we help people know what the risks are out there? We want to take these more into it is the business relevant risk reporting, so we can provide that extra value. So lots of things there to think about, but that is our ultimate goal. We want to feed this back from a VM perspective, both to inform us, but it also helps transform the information we are providing and the value that we're bringing to the organization. Because I'm not looking at problems that maybe don't need to get looked at because of all the other components that come into play. Thinking about it from a classic VM perspective, think about it from the standpoint of I've got, say, I've got a server or I've got a device that has all kinds of vulnerabilities on it. We can't fix it because of the backlog. There's blockers that are coming into play. The exceptions are out there. We've got end of life, end of support products, and the ugliness. I'm layering all kinds of stuff on there. But we've got tons of reasons why things can't get dealt with. But as an example, if I've got compensating controls in play because I have decided to put this on an isolated segment, standalone, let's go extreme. It's sitting in a locked building that has an armed security guard at the outside and the badge reader that is checked and you have to validate before going in, be able to look at the system. My risk is a lot lower for that exposure compared to if that same server is, let's say, running our public facing software and we can't and don't take it offline. The exposure is completely different and the risk associated with that. So how are we layering in some of these extra controls to help us minimize the risk and understand the risk, quite frankly, with some of these pieces of information? So where we have detection gaps, bringing this back over into VM, we should be prioritizing patching here. If I know I can't find this problem, I can't find the attacker I can't find the attacker using these techniques, I should be dealing with these problems faster. It is that patch, quote is on here, in quotes, patch faster when detection is weak, patch smarter when detection is strong. This could be the difference between, yeah, welcome to an emergency sky is falling situation to where actually we feel the risk is managed enough that this can actually follow standard processes and it'll be done in two instead of I need this done tonight. Understanding the risk that's associated with it. It does help us, as I've mentioned, bringing this back to reflect risk reduction. It's, are we able to validate the attack paths? Are we showing that these are closed off from the exposure perspective? Not just, hey, we've patched 347,000 of the 2 million vulnerabilities. Because that ladder doesn't tell you risk, it's just pure volume count. It should, and I would highly recommend feeding it back into the VM backlog. It does look from compensating control perspective. It does do the prioritization to help you out. What's the ugliness out here? Maybe that'll help you prioritize what is in the backlog, because we all have that big backlog that's out there. And then it ties in with a lot of organizations. We are doing a lot of work on the MITRE attack and looking at the coverage points and the information that comes out from MITRE with the attack framework. But a lot of us as well aren't tying that back into the VM program very well. That happens when we're looking at it more from an exposure perspective. What are the threats that are out there? Am I properly managing what we know about? Or sorry, the threats that are being indicated out there. Can I tell? Do I know? Can I fix these problems? Do I have a way to detect these problems? Do I need to really rush through and solve this problem because I have no way to detect it? That's what we're trying to do, is managing the threats as well as our exposures better inside our environment. Continuous threat exposure management, CTEM. Imagine that. But that is the goal. That's what we're trying to do. That's how we can start to bring this back from a VM perspective. Now, here, I've said some of these points already. So, threat intelligence. How do we tie this into the vulnerability management workflows? Threat intelligence is very important to us. You probably have a team, if you're doing a lot of threat intelligence work, dedicated for that. So what are the current TTPs that are being used, relevant from the sector perspective that we work in? If this is what we know are the active TTPs, do we have the ability to deal with this? So great way to tie in from the threat intelligence perspective. New and emerging TTPs that are not covered as they continue to evolve. This should help drive from a VM perspective for where do we need to put the focus for remediation, as well as the detection logic perspective, where items need to happen to help be informed better in the organization. 2 points on that. Where are we actually looking at it from exploit perspective? What's actively being exploited in the wild? Looking at it from the classic VM program, if nothing else, have you fixed all the items on the KEV list? If you haven't done that yet and you still have them, yes, government's mandated to take a look at the KEV from the US government perspective. They have to remediate these and they've been given timeframes. But I'd argue, and I know I say this in my class, for those that maybe have taken that, if it's on the KEV list and the government says this is actively being exploited out there, might be useful for us to probably take a look at that, even if we're not in government. So just aside from that perspective. And ultimately, what we want to try and do here as well is closing that gap between what's going on the VM and the threat detection and response. We do want to feed the insights that are coming in here. If there was a breach, something has happened, the data spill that has been out there inside our environments, we should definitely bring that in from the IR team, but it goes the same for what's going on in the threat intelligence. What are we seeing for these insights? Because now I can look at that. Where are my exposures that they're actually taking advantage of right now? What are they targeting for systems even? Go simple. From their targeting finance system. Yeah, well, my finance system's got some unpatched stuff. Maybe that'll prioritize it. If they're looking for specific type of information or only using certain kind of targeting certain applications in order to get in, or are they phishing for certain information or certain type of ways they're trying to get in, all can help feed in to ensure we are reducing the exposure for the organization. Maybe some of this does get fed into, I'll go not an extreme, but I'll go over, maybe this goes into the security awareness because its information has to go out to people because we're seeing a lot more of the, let's call it the vishings that are out there. So they're calling in, trying to impersonate the help desk or things like that to get people to do stuff so they can access our environment. Maybe that's something we should let our staff know about. Again, not always VM, but it ties into the broader exposure management, which is where we are moving to. How can we quicker, faster, better deal with the situations at hand? So, I've covered a lot of things here today so far, But if you like what you've seen on here, feel free to come out. We talk about a lot of this and a whole bunch of other stuff inside the Leadership 516 class. And adding a lot more because we're going through and doing some updates here. So it is just more and more. This is where we're evolving programs to. So that's what we're continuing to do. Because as that graphic that I have there on the screen is, we need to adapt to the attackers, not the alerts that we're seeing out there in our environments. So key takeaways for you. Couple things just to help wrap a little bit of this up and trying to leave us about 10 minutes for questions here as well. So remember, if you do have questions, please put that in the Q&A. I'm going to flip over and be able to take a look at that in a minute, because trying to run here with the screen on, everything else, I can't see everything running at the same time. So we'll come back to the Q&A here. I got a couple more slides for us to go through. But some of the wrap-ups here. Key things. We can't measure those unknown threats directly. But what the goal here, and hopefully I've given you some ideas and methods or metrics to start taking a look at, or maybe we need to worry about expanding or looking at it with a different view. We need to see how prepared we are to help try and find those. I can't detect, but if I can look and check to see that stuff that we're doing is out there and we're able to find it, we can probably indicate at least we've got pretty good coverage. Won't eliminate the problems, but at least you're going to be able to see that we can't measure all of that indirect or directly. We've got to look a little bit indirectly on here. So with those proxy metrics that we talked about and continual validation, so the continuous component on here, it's going to help reduce those hidden risks that we have in our environment. ML and threat hunting items for the leading indicator. We got to take a look and see, are they actually doing what we want from the machine learning side? And the threat hunting can give us indicators as well, or hopefully not indicators of compromise or proof that there's somebody in the environment. They do, but at least are we seeing challenges here? Is it going to help us come up with new detection mechanisms or ruling configurations, or maybe identify we have gaps? That's what we want to do. We got to continue to evolve. You're not going to be able to do all of this overnight. It's going to be a slow evolution as you continue to migrate over to look more from an exposure perspective. It really does start to break down between some of the different teams, how we've traditionally been structured, be it with the VM team versus the IR teams, with the threat intelligence team, as well as the operations to get work getting dealt with quickly. That's what we're doing. We're breaking that down and getting focused teams that have all the skills that work much better together to try and deliver and reduce the risk. We're going to have to, it will be an evolution over time. If you're looking to launch something with CTEM, you're probably going to start with a small scope and look and see. Maybe it's only going to be certain class of assets, something that is internet facing, but you define the scope and run with it, but it's not going to be the whole organization. With CTEM, you have multiple scopes for what is being looked at. So the teams can focus, but you also have the ability to pivot, add new scopes, remove scopes that make sense. But even looking at some of this, choose a couple metrics and start tracking on those. Maybe it's going to be coming back to the coverage, or take a look and see, what do we have for outstanding vulnerabilities that we know, or we map the TTPs over inside attack? Do we have coverage for those? One really great use of some of the AI components out there, pick on ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, whatever. Take a look on it. Feed it a vulnerability ID. I did this recently with one of the ones that was released that day. With this vulnerability, how does this map over to the TTPs from an attack framework? Spits the information back for you. Thinking about this, can I expand that? Maybe I won't throw it into ChatGPT. Maybe I'll want this in a local model. Let's just say, spin up Olama and download one of the models there so it stays all local, doesn't go out. Feed some of the vulnerabilities you have it map over to the TTPs, see what are the common themes you have here. Do I then have the coverage for these? Or maybe that's actually going to highlight we've got some exposures in the backlog that really are more important because we're not able to detect on them. All things that can be done, but you're going to be starting small choose one or two things from that perspective. Now, you saw some stuff up at the start here in regards to the triads. That was before we started off. 516's in the Operational Cybersecurity Executive Triad from SANS, just 3 courses linked together that are the Operational Cybersecurity Executive. All I wanted to mention there, but kind of a cool thing, neat, nifty. And in case you didn't know, if you complete all 3 courses, there's a funky coin that you get out of it. But from the VM perspective, the Leadership 516, Building and Leading VM Programs. What I've got on here, just some examples of what's coming up. Head over to sans.org/LDR516. You can pick up the on-demand anytime. The SANS Fire is the next teach I have coming up on July 14th. After that, we've got a course that's running for us in Vegas. I'm teaching that one as well at SANS Network Security. That's September 22nd. Just some of the upcoming classes that we have in case you like what you've seen here and want to come and visit me for 5 days instead of just the 1 hour we had here today. Now, 2 quick things. One, I want to say thank you for taking the time to be with me today, to actually have taken that hour out of your day to see what we can learn, or what we can get more information. Hopefully, I've given you a little bit of food for thought here. And just leave you with this last comment slide thing on here, because it is, our VM strategy is showing we've got to make it count. So with that, I'm going to flip over here to the Q&A and see if there's any information in there. Apologize if stuff popped up while I was talking, but as I said, just too hard to try and juggle everything. I'm old and decrepit. I can only do 2 things at once. So standing and talking. All right, so I see we got 3 questions in here. We've got one from the first one in. Do you think vulnerability management and exposure management is synonymous with attack surface management? Do you see a difference between the terms? A great question. What are people meaning from this perspective? For me, I do actually see a difference. Normally, from an exposure management perspective, we are looking across the board, everywhere that we have inside the organization, and vulnerability management normally is doing that as well. Now, we do have tooling that from the attack surface perspective. For me, at least, I tend to find the attack surface is trying to help us identify, the assets that we have out there, maybe some of the vulnerabilities, because they're looking at them more passively than an active scan with the ASM scanners and definitely the EASM scanners. So it's more of a help you see what you have in the environment for the attack surface, but it doesn't get to the level of granularity that we get, say, from a doing the full vulnerability scan, understanding the exposures, doing the threat modeling, helping deal with the breach and attack simulations. The ASM, I find, is not getting to that level. I think it's one of the tools in our toolkit that we do want to be leveraging, and it's a component, but I think it's part of a broader exposure management program that we would be running inside the organization. So hopefully helps out there. Another question I see in here, what's the best way to leverage EPSS into the VM? Great question. What I tend to use from an EPSS perspective, it is one piece of information to help me understand from an exploitability standpoint. It isn't perfect. It is just another number. It can change regularly. You could argue sometimes it's more lagging than other pieces of threat intelligence that we have out there. But if we have access to it and are starting to marry this together, it's giving you data. If I've got a vulnerability that at least for the next 30 days, it's got a value of like 0.01, so like a 1% chance of being exploited, compared to a vulnerability that has an EPSS score of, let's say, 0.8, which is an 80% chance that it's going to be exploited in the next, or at least estimated to be exploited in the next 30 days, because that's what EPSS gives us. That alone tells me the one with the 80%, I probably should deal with first. So it's a great way to start leveraging into exposures and potential exploitation, I find, with EPSS. So, and because a lot of our tools are now starting and do have support for it, are giving it to us, it tends to be easier for us to engage than, say, a full threat modeling and exposure management. It's kind of the step to start layering in those pieces of context that can really help us start to get to the point of what is mattering. It's not just, hey, it's a CVSS score of 9.2. Well, it's a 9.2, but it also has a high chance of being exploited. Throw that in with another piece of context like business importance. This is on a mission critical asset. That's in the BCP. This has to be up first. Those three pieces of context alone helps me see what's more important. So that's how I'd bring that from a VM and start using it. And then as you continue to advance, get more on the threat intelligence side, that's where EPSS itself becomes less valuable because you're getting greater fidelity from your threat intelligence or your CTI team talking about directly what's happening. The EPSS becomes less value. It's not, this may be happening. Here, no, this is what's currently going on from the CTI team. So there's my answer on that one. And then does SANS offer or plan to offer any in-depth courses on cyber threat modeling? Threat modeling is covered in some of our classes. I do not believe we have a dedicated course on threat modeling. And I don't know all of the classes that are talking about it right now from the modeling standpoint. I know in 5.16, I've added some components in that I'm working on right now to talk more on it, but we're not spending like 2 days of the course to talk about threat modeling. We do have a risk course that also talks about it. That's the, I forget the leadership course number for that one, that does talk about risk management. They talk about threat modeling. It's probably about half a day in that course, maybe a little less. But again, it's not a dedicated class on threat modeling. So I don't think we have one right now, and I don't know if it's planned to be coming down the road. I personally haven't heard. So there's at least some information that I know on that one. I know Hayes and you may be typing some stuff out there for it as well to put back in the Q&A. I see we got another one in. From the perspective of a vulnerability analyst, what are the most practical and immediate actionable steps you recommend to consistently integrate CTI in my daily workflow? Oh, now there's a loaded question for the last one there, being 3 minutes from the end of the hour. Great question, though. For me, trying to use cyber threat intelligence, I need this automatically getting put and available to me because I can't scale it up if I have to manually go to, let's pick on Feedly, just a site where you can get access to information about what's going on related to it. But trying to do that manually across the board, we just can't scale it up. So I find to effectively bring it in and practically use some threat intelligence information, I need to have it getting automatically processed from a machine and getting married against the vulnerabilities inside my environment. If I have to do some stuff manually, you're going to have to pick and choose. And so maybe it's going to be because you are, say, doing some weighted average prioritization at the moment. So I already have, I've got, let's just pick on, I've got CVSS scores being factored in there. I've got exploitability, is it public facing from a weighted scoring, as well as, let's say, mission criticality. I don't even remember all the, but if you've already got something that's percolating it up to be into, let's call it a critical bucket, or it's scoring, let's say 87 out of 100, then you might be able to do some manual checking just to validate some of the information, or really try and fine tune some of the scoring. But I find I need to automate it in there, have it ingesting into the tooling, either through an aggregator, something like the ServiceNow type aspects where we can pull data together, or is it being ingested into things like Arkenas or Brinkas that are out there, Nucleus Security, that I can ingest the data and get it properly marrying up. And then I'm going to be able to actually call it tweak the levers that are in here, adjust them and put the weighting factors so it's actually being layered into it. But without the automation, I can't scale it because it's just, we've got hundreds of thousands in the backlog. I can't ask my analyst to sit there, please check all of these and see what the CTI is saying today. Oh, wait, something's changed. Can you go take a look tomorrow and look at them all again? We've got to have the automated feeds in there. Otherwise, it's really hard for us to try and leverage at any scale. So hopefully that helped answer that. I know we're at the limit here. So again, thank you to everybody for the time today. Do appreciate it. I know we'll end up getting this posted online, so it will come back. You'll be able to take a look at this afterwards as well. If there's something I said you want to go back, pay attention to, take a look at some of the links that were in there. That'll all be available to you afterwards. So thank you once again.